All right, and welcome back to another segment of Raul's World of Synths. I am Raul. This time around, we're going to go a little bit further with the A143-9 voltage-controlled Quadrature LFO. If you were with us the last time, we went over some basics on this particular module. This time, I thought it would be interesting to kind of go through and do a few audio demonstrations of what's going on here, and also maybe get a look at some of the oscilloscope views again in reference to very specific things. Now, if any of these sort of demonstrations generate questions, you may want to just jump back one video and take a look at the basics. In the last one, we discussed this idea of destructive interference, where when one wave is 180 degrees out of another wave, they cancel each other out. So I thought it'd be kind of interesting to hear that kind of in action. So let's go ahead and get a sine wave. That's the one that's at 0 degrees. And hopefully you have kind of a decent audio system with low end. So here's our sine wave. Just your basic sine wave. And we can adjust the frequency up here. But for our purposes, we're going to actually cancel this wave out. So let's get the 180 degree sine, patch in there. And then let me take it right into input number 2. And pretty much cancels it out. And that's pretty close to 0. Now, there probably is a little rumble, but you probably won't be able to hear anything. Now watch, as soon as I unpatch it, you can hear that wave again. And if I were to do the opposite, like leave this one plugged in, I would take this out. You could hear the sine wave again. So because they're 180 degrees out of phase from each other, they're actually canceling each other out. Pretty interesting. So before we go on to the next demonstration, I do want you to be able to see that again in case you missed it in the last one. That way you know kind of what I'm talking about at 180 degrees. So let me patch the 0 degree wave over here to my oscilloscope. I do need to change the magnification because it looks like it's maybe a little bit too close. There we go. So we got a nice little 0 degree sine wave. Now let's look at the 180 degree version. There we go. And you can see how they're kind of intertwined. And so when they're in this state at 180 degrees, they actually cancel each other out. Okay, pretty straightforward. I thought that was a pretty interesting thing when I kind of stumbled upon it. I had always read about it in textbooks and stuff like that, but this gave me an actual opportunity to try it out. Now, waves that are not in that is immediately below 180 degrees, or let's say the one right below that, 90 degrees out of phase, it's going to look something like this. Over at our oscilloscope, you can see that. And it's kind of more like they're just not quite lined up rather than intertwined. In this case, you would actually hear something. So let's actually just have a listen real quick before we go on. So let me take the 0 again, go into my VCA. There we go. And then grab the 90 degree and then go into input 2. And see there, you can still hear both. Okay, pretty straightforward. So nothing really canceling anything else out in that situation. So at any rate, for the next audio demonstration, we're going to do something a little bit different. Haven't tried anything like this before. I have 2 VCOs set up. One is going to be down here, hanging out next to our A143-9 and A110. And then in the upper row, so up here, I have another A110. I worked a little bit to try to get them in tune, although I didn't get them quite perfectly in tune. At least that's what my tuner was telling me. But what I thought would be interesting is to kind of hear, let me see if I can explain this. The 0 degree sine wave in low frequency, modulating the pitch of one VCO, and then the 180 degree sine, that is, completely out of phase with it, modulating the pitch of a different sine. And then you, the listeners at home, are going to actually be hearing this panned. So one of them is going to be running to the left speaker, and one is going to be running to the right. So let's go ahead and get this patch started, because I want you to kind of hear what this sounds like, because I thought this was very interesting. And it kind of creates kind of a very unique effect. So this we're going to call at the bottom VCO number 1. And let's see. I don't want to patch it quite yet, so I'm just going to leave my cable right there for now. But I'm going to patch my modulation. So let me get my 0 degree sine out of there and just go into CV number 2 right there. There we go. And now I'm going to take the 180 degree sine down here, and I'm going to go up to my other A110 right up here. There we go. And now let me get my other audio input, and we'll patch these into our mixer. So we'll be able to hear these kind of in a strange kind of stereo effect. So I'm not going to use a sine wave because we're actually doing sine waves to do the modulation, but I'm going to move this over into low frequency mode. And I may have to tweak the speed of that here in a moment. Maybe bring it down to about there. Okay, so I'm going to use the pulse wave from our VCO number 1. There we go. And then now let's listen to VCO 2 up here in the top. There we go. So hopefully you can hear that. Now, let me bring the modulation speed down a little bit. There you go. And this is kind of a very unique effect, because if you remember back to that oscilloscope view, and here let me show you kind of a shot of that real quick. This is just the previous recording of it. You can see how the two waves are kind of intertwined. So that's actually kind of what's happening with the modulation going out. But since these VCOs are actually just audible, they kind of alternate, but at the same frequency, if that makes sense. Hopefully it did. Just out of phase from each other. So it kind of creates this sort of alternating type effect. And of course, at this point, you can go in and sort of adjust the frequency and make that effect a little more pronounced if you wanted to. A little faster. I have my attenuators on my A110s set fairly low, so if I wanted to adjust the subtlety of it, I could bring my attenuator down a little bit. I'll bring this one down a little. So, there you go. Now, previously in the first video, we were talking about how this can be used kind of in a quadraphonic type setup. This is one way that you could sort of get there. You could have this sine wave going to one modulation destination, and then another sine wave going to a different thing. It doesn't necessarily have to be a VCO. And then have them pan to two different speakers. In our case, we're using 2 speakers, but if I had 4 speakers, then I could do all 4 modulation sources and send them to 4 different things, and then you would be able to hear sort of each one sort of slightly ahead of the other, and then it would just kind of continuously move. It's a very interesting type of effect. I like it. Let's see. for the most part, as far as demonstration goes, those are the two short little demonstrations I wanted to do for this video segment. In the upcoming video, we're going to be taking a look at the A143-9 voltage control quadrature LFO, but we're going to actually get it to work with another module that I have hopefully coming in the mail, the Doepfer A135 voltage controlled mixer, and we're going to get sort of the four outputs of this going to the four CV inputs of that to get kind of a more pronounced sort of panning effect. So hopefully you'll stay tuned for that, because it should prove to be fairly interesting. This is just kind of a basic introduction into that. And then maybe a little bit later we'll do some modulation of this module and kind of examine the CV input for polarizing the input over here. Whenever you have a modulation input, you can actually adjust it positive or negative, if you remember that from the basics video. So please stay tuned for that. A lot of good things to come, and keep on patching out there.